Daniel Carter stepped outside, ready for another long shift at the fire station. But the moment he reached his ute, he stopped dead in his tracks. A bright yellow violation notice flapped under his windshield wiper. Daniel frowned, glancing at his front lawn. Lush, neatly trimmed. Absolutely nothing wrong with it. "You've got to be joking," he muttered, snatching up the fine. Just then, the sharp click of high heels echoed down the pavement. "Good morning, Mr. Carter." Veronica Blake. Ex-lawyer, self-appointed dictator of Westfield Gardens, and the woman who had turned the HOA into her own personal regime. She stood there, tablet in hand, an infuriating smirk on her lips. "This fine," Daniel said, holding up the notice. "What the hell is this?" Veronica barely looked up from her screen. HOA regulation, section 7.2. Grass height must not exceed 3 inches. Yours is approximately 3.5. Daniel clenched his jaw. "I just pulled a 16-hour shift fighting a factory fire. I'll mow it this weekend." Veronica's smirk widened. "Rules are rules, Carter. Fail to pay within 72 hours and the fine doubles." Daniel locked eyes with her. "This isn't about my lawn, is it?" Veronica gave a small shrug before turning away, her heels tapping a deliberate rhythm against the pavement. Daniel didn't know it then, but this was just the beginning. Daniel Carter knew something was off. A single $200 fine for slightly overgrown grass? That was petty. But Veronica Blake didn't do petty. She did calculated. So, later that night, as he scrolled through the Westfield Gardens community Facebook group, his suspicion turned into outrage. Dozens of residents had posted similar fines, all issued within the last 2 weeks. And there was a pattern. Sarah Thompson, an ER nurse, fined $150 because her rubbish bins were left out too long after a 24-hour shift saving lives. Mark Henderson, a firefighter, ordered to remove his kid's basketball hoop because it was an unauthorized structure. The Martinez family, penalized for leaving Christmas lights up 2 days past New Year, they'd been at their grandmother's funeral. Veronica wasn't just enforcing rules. She was targeting first responders and essential workers, people too busy to fight back. Daniel's blood boiled. But it got worse. Just as he was about to log off, his security camera alert pinged. He opened the app, and there, lit up under his porch light, was Veronica, taking photos of his garden gnomes. Those weren't just any decorations. They belonged to his late wife, the last pieces of her he kept in their home. And that's when Daniel decided he wasn't just going to fight back. He was going to end this. The next morning, Daniel barely pulled out of his driveway before his phone buzzed again. Another HOA violation. "Bloody hell," he muttered, pulling over to check the fine. Violation. Unapproved decorations. Fee. $250. Potential escalation to HO board review. He let out a sharp laugh. They were actually serious. As he pulled back into his driveway, a familiar, grating voice rang out. "Morning, Mr. Carter." Veronica stood on the sidewalk, arms crossed, flanked by 2 men in matching black security uniforms. Daniel stepped out of his ute, slowly. Something felt different this time. "These fines," he said, voice calm but firm. "This isn't about community standards, is it?" Veronica smiled. "Oh, Daniel. It's about compliance." One of the security guards shifted slightly, resting a hand on what looked suspiciously like a baton. Daniel's instincts, honed from years in high-pressure life-or-death situations, flared. "These men," he said, nodding at the guards, "they don't work for the police, and I know for a fact they're not from any licensed Queensland security firm." For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed Veronica's face. Daniel took a step forward. "You see," he continued, pulling out his phone, "I checked. Ironclad Security Solutions doesn't exist, not legally. And if I had to guess, I'd say you hired them off the books." The guards glanced at each other. Veronica tilted her chin up, but her smirk wasn't as confident anymore. "I don't see how that concerns you." Daniel took another step closer. It concerns me when unlicensed security officers are parked outside my house, trying to intimidate a firefighter. He turned to the guards. Did she tell you who I was? Silence. I'm Captain Daniel Carter, Brisbane Fire and Rescue. And if there's one thing I know, it's that you two have no bloody business enforcing anything in this neighborhood. One of the guards tensed. But before anything else could happen, Daniel lifted his phone, hit record, and smiled. Smile, Veronica. You're live. What happens next? Think Veronica's going down? Drop a fire emoji in the comments. Smash that like button if you think Daniel's about to flip the script. Subscribe now, because trust me, this battle is just getting started. Daniel Carter knew intimidation when he saw it, and Veronica Blake had just made a serious mistake. As she stormed off with her two so-called security guards, Daniel didn't go inside. He stood there, watching, memorizing. The logos on their uniforms, the unmarked black SUVs, the way they carried themselves. Too rigid, too rehearsed. This wasn't a standard security team. His instincts told him something was off, and instincts were what had kept him alive through firestorms, rescues, and disasters far worse than a power-hungry HOA president. So, Daniel did what he did best. He started digging. By that evening, he had everything laid out on his kitchen table: HOA regulations, fine notices, security camera screenshots. But the real jackpot came when he ran a business check on Ironclad Security Solutions. Nothing. No business license. No security accreditation. No registered employees. This wasn't just some dodgy enforcement squad. This was a ghost company. And then he found something worse. After an hour of digging through council contracts, Daniel discovered Ironclad had been awarded a $200,000 community safety contract, signed off by none other than Veronica Blake. But the payments? They weren't going to a security office. They were going to a private account under the name of Lucas Blake, Veronica's brother. Daniel let out a slow breath. Now he knew exactly what was happening. This wasn't just an HOA power trip. This was embezzlement, fraud, corruption at the highest level of the neighborhood, and he wasn't the only victim. Daniel pulled up the Westfield Gardens HOA Facebook group and started cross-referencing names. Sarah the ER nurse, fined 8 times. Mark the firefighter, harassed for his kid's basketball hoop. The Martinez family, their driveway measured 3 times in a week. His own house, suddenly under constant surveillance. All targeted. And all, coincidentally, had voted against Veronica in the last HOA election. This wasn't about community standards. This was deliberate, calculated, a punishment. Daniel exhaled slowly. So that's how she wanted to play it. At exactly 2:13 a.m., Daniel's phone buzzed. Security alert, motion detected. He opened his surveillance app, and there they were. 2 figures in dark clothing, pacing at the end of his driveway. One of them held a measuring tape, while the other took notes. Daniel zoomed in on the footage. Ironclad security. And in the dim glow of the streetlight, he saw something that made his jaw tighten. Veronica Blake, standing across the road, watching, smiling. She thought she was untouchable. But what she didn't know? She'd just made her last mistake. Daniel Carter had faced wildfires, collapsing buildings, and life-or-death situations. But this was something else entirely. Veronica Blake and her fake security thugs thought they were untouchable, creeping around in the dark, measuring driveways and issuing fines like they were running their own little police state. But now they had Daniel's full attention. By sunrise, Daniel was 10 steps ahead. He'd spent the early hours compiling evidence. Every fine, every security footage clip, every dodgy transaction linking Veronica's brother to HOA funds. He wasn't just building a case. He was setting a trap. First, he forwarded everything to his mate, Detective Jack Lawson from the Queensland Police Financial Crimes Unit. The moment Lawson saw the unregistered company and missing security licenses, he knew something was off. "Mate, this is fraud," Lawson said over the phone. And if what you're saying about them using intimidation tactics is true, they're looking at serious charges. Daniel smirked. Then let's make sure we catch them red-handed. That night, Daniel left his ute parked in the driveway, unlocked, with his dash cam running. He didn't have to wait long. At exactly 2:37 a.m., his phone buzzed. Security alert. Motion detected. Daniel pulled up the live feed. Bingo. Two figures, dressed in the same ironclad security uniforms, were standing right at the edge of his property. One of them was scribbling something down on a clipboard, the other whispering into a radio. And then, just as expected, a third figure appeared. Veronica. Standing under the streetlight, arms crossed, watching. Like a queen overseeing her kingdom. Only this time, she didn't realize the entire thing was being recorded. Daniel let them finish. Let them snoop around his property, inspect his fence, even take another photo of his garden gnomes. And then, he made his move. With the click of a button, Daniel remotely switched on his ute's headlights, flooding the entire street with light. The security guards froze like deer in headlights. Veronica spun around, eyes wide. And before any of them could react, the unmistakable sound of police sirens filled the air. A Queensland police cruiser whipped around the corner, tires screeching against the pavement. Lawson had timed it perfectly. The two ironclad guards immediately threw their hands up, but Veronica? She bolted. Daniel stepped forward, arms crossed, as the officers chased her down the street. And in that moment, he knew one thing for sure. The hunter had just become the hunted. The air in Westfield Gardens had never felt this charged. Blue and red lights flashed against the quiet suburban houses, cutting through the early morning darkness. Neighbors peeked through their curtains, phones out, recording. This wasn't just another HOA dispute. This was the fall of a tyrant. Daniel Carter stood at the edge of his driveway, arms crossed, watching as the scene unfolded. Detective Jack Lawson stepped out of his police cruiser, his sharp eyes sweeping over the situation. He barely glanced at the two ironclad security guards being cuffed and shoved into the back of a police van. They weren't his main concern. His real target? Veronica Blake. She was still arguing with two officers, her pristine white blazer now streaked with dirt after her failed escape attempt. "You don't understand," she screeched, her voice losing its usual smug composure. "I was just—" Lawson cut her off with a glare. "You were just what, Veronica? Running an unlicensed security operation? Extorting your own community? Intimidating emergency workers?" He let the words hang in the air. "Because I've got a mountain of evidence saying that's exactly what you've been doing." Her face went pale. By mid-morning, the HOA board had called an emergency meeting. This time, Veronica wasn't leading it. This time, she was the accused. The community center was packed, filled with homeowners who had spent the past year living under her reign of fear. They weren't afraid anymore. Daniel sat at the back, silent, watching. One by one, people stood up and spoke. The firefighter, fined repeatedly for his kid's basketball hoop. The ER nurse, who had been threatened with a lien over a rubbish bin. The elderly couple, harassed for their choice of garden decorations. Every voice, every story, stacked like bricks in the case against Veronica. And then, Lawson stood up. He walked to the front, holding up a thick stack of documents. "This," he said, voice cold and clear, "is proof of embezzlement, intimidation, and fraud. Mrs. Blake has been diverting HOA funds into her brother's fake security company, using illegal fines to funnel money into a personal account." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Veronica sank lower into her chair. Mr. Jenkins, the HOA's longest-serving board member, cleared his throat. "I think it's time we take a vote." Hands shot up across the room. The verdict? Veronica Blake was officially removed from the HOA, permanently. And the final blow? The Queensland police were charging her with fraud and financial misconduct. Daniel walked out of the meeting to a neighborhood that felt different. Lighter. For the first time in months, kids played on the street without fear of fines. Families put Christmas decorations back up. and Westfield Gardens finally belonged to its people again. But the real kicker? A few weeks later, Daniel got an alert from his security camera. He opened the app, expecting nothing. But there, standing outside a brand new house in a different suburb, was Veronica Blake, measuring her new driveway. And in front of her, a brand new, oversized automated security gate. Daniel smirked. In the end, Veronica didn't hate security gates. She just hated not being the one in control.